Hello, good morning. If you are watching this during your morning, good evening, good afternoon, depending on where you're logging on from. If you are catching the recording, as always, please feel free to comment any questions on the recording when it gets uploaded. If you are here live, feel free to ask questions throughout. But I wanted to talk about today what are the different type of intensives I can do? Because a lot of therapists have been asking me that because I think what we see is the ones who are doing EMDR intensives, the ones who are doing couples intensives. I don't think it's that they are more popular per se, like those are the only intensives that someone can book. I think the people who are doing those intensives and are booking those intensives are the loudest about their successes. But I work with lots of therapists, whether they are doing family intensives, parenting intensives, anxiety focused intensives. Literally, an intensive, as I have always said, it can be focused on whatever work you already do, because an intensive at the end of the day is just an extended therapy session. I was just on a podcast yesterday where the host asked me, is there anything that does not fit well in an intensive? And I'm like, honestly, not that I've heard of. I mean, you can do psychoeducation based intensives where the person just learns a lot at once. And that can be, it's essentially like a private workshop, right? Where you're teaching lots of different regulation skills, information about the nervous system and communication styles and lots of things like that. So it does not have to be that you are trained in EMDR and you do couples work in order to do intensives. And so I want to talk a little bit more explicitly today about what are some of those examples of non-EMDR and couples-based intensives that you might be able to do. So I've got my notes up here. If you see me looking off screen, that's what I'm looking at, so that I can go through some ideas of what is the focus of the intensive and what might you actually do in that intensive. Because the second question I most often get is, what do I actually talk about for 3 hours? How do I make a whole day pass by with a client? And again, this goes back to all of my recommendations around don't do what other people are doing if it does not work for you. Because if you can't sit with a client for 3 hours, if your nervous system can't handle 6 hours in one day, don't do that just because others seem to be successful with it. We are all different. My personal max in one go is 3 hours. So even with my couples therapy, my couples intensives, I might do, well, I do 5 hours in one day. It's 3 hours and then like a 60 to 90 minute break and then 2 hours. And that feels pretty doable for me, but I probably couldn't do more than that. So 5 hours in one day for me, chunked out, is my max. So don't do what others are doing just because they seem successful. Think about first what's actually going to work for you. So I'm going to go through a couple different ideas I have. Again, if you do happen to come on live, let me know in the chat if you want some feedback, you want to talk some things through. If you're catching the recording, drop your ideas of what would I do with this? How do I market this? And whatever that might be. So not EMDR, not couples intensives. Let's focus on even anxiety. However you work with anxiety, if that is social anxiety, if that's panic attacks, if that is OCD, a little bit more like on that side of the spectrum, you can still do an anxiety focused intensive where ultimately the goal of that anxiety focused intensive would be to help the client to understand and regulate their anxiety. And this can look lots of different ways. Let's say you booked a 3-hour anxiety focused intensive and maybe you incorporate different somatic modalities, maybe you incorporate IFS as a modality, but what you are actually doing in those, let's say 3 hours, for example, might really depend and vary. So hour one, for example, you could be doing psychoeducation on what actually is anxiety, where does it come from, what's going on in our nervous system, and cover some grounding techniques. So again, it can be psychoeducation even for just the first hour when you're working with anxiety. And then hour two might be doing some more somatic exploration of what actually happens when you are anxious? What is happening in the body? Again, if you're doing like a parts perspective, what parts are coming up? What parts feel anxious? How do they express that anger? How are other parts reacting to um, the anxious ones that are coming up? So lots of different ways you can explore that in hour two. And then in hour three, you might create more of like a coping plan moving forward of, okay, so when anxiety comes up again, when you experience this again, learning the skills that you learned in hour one, what would you do moving forward, right? How would you deal with it differently so that you're not having panic attacks, so that you're not shutting down plans that you really do want to attend, but you're feeling too anxious to attend. So you could see how that's just one example of a 3-hour anxiety focused intensive. And you don't have to use somatic practices. You don't have to use IFS lenses. Again, you can do even like 3 hours of psychoeducation and planning. It's almost like intensives can also be thought of as like short-term focused therapy. When I used to work at the University Counseling Center where I did my internship, they called them, we were encouraged to do 45 to 60-minute sessions, but again, you can imagine how this went. Single session clinic is what we called it. And more often than not, it was more helpful if someone got to stay for like 2 hours, 2.5 hours, because you really got to sit with this one student who is feeling overwhelmed, who's feeling like they miss home, they just had a breakup, whatever it is. And actually, we could get so much work done in that single session clinic, right? So a lot of people worry that one intensive, even 2 to 3 hours, won't be enough, but you can actually cover a surprising amount of things, especially when it comes to anxiety. So that is one example of you can just focus on anxiety and you do not have to treat it with EMDR. So let me know if you have thoughts, questions about that. Again, if you're here live or whether you're watching the recording. Another example is I work with a lot of therapists who do more psychodynamic work. And so, as you know, when you are doing psychodynamic work and you're focusing on any unconscious patterns, things that happen from early life, how patterns and relationships have played out over time, you could spend all day doing this. So, for example, um, even just to start with hour one of like, it's essentially intake, right? Let's establishing what are our goals here? What's your personal history? Give me kind of like a map of where your relationships have been. What are your family relationships? What are current relationships right now? And then hour two, you're already starting to talk about, okay, let's dive deeper into your family experiences. Let's dive deeper into what was life like growing up? How were the relationships that you formed with your caregivers, with any siblings, with early classmates and teachers and things like that? You could probably talk about that for more than even just 1 hour. But by hour three, after starting to talk a little bit more with this client, you're probably starting to notice some core relational patterns and different, like from the psychodynamic lens, you might call them defenses. From an attachment lens, you might call them like attachment strategies. Like, what has this person done throughout their life to keep themselves safe and to maintain healthy relationships, right? What have they tried? And so already that is 3 hours of work. And you've seen we haven't exactly, not like not made progress per se, but we are establishing a really good baseline of what exactly is going on with a person. So you could spend 5 more hours, even, for example, doing some like free association. You can do some journaling prompts or mindfulness exercises together. Those who, again, do psychodynamic work and incorporate any dream work or projective exercises, that could be a place to incorporate that within the intensive, or even bringing in, especially as psychodynamic therapist, or if you do like interpersonal processing or emotionally focused therapy, bringing in like, even here with me right now, what's coming up for you as you talk about these things, as you share these patterns, as you get vulnerable. So that's a whole other hour of work that you can do. Again, that could probably last for longer, processing different emotions that come up and really just working on however long you meet, whether this is in one day or multiple hours over multiple days, integrating all of that information, right? What did they learn from really doing a deep dive into their personal history, exploring family of origin, looking at those core relational patterns and defenses or strategies to keep themselves safe in relationships, and what do they want to do moving forward? And that's just like one example of how you can use psychodynamic or interpersonal process within an intensive. Again, let me know if you have any questions about that if you are here live, or if you're watching the recording. I know a lot of people do some variation of CBT or DBT. So this is another great set, or one individual set or both combined, to incorporate into more of like a skills-based intensive. If you're familiar with DBT, you already know that there are DBT skills groups, and that's a whole part of the model of DBT, is that people are getting that psychoeducation each week, sometimes every other week, where really what they're doing is learning the skills, and they're doing homework, and they're reflecting on things, and they're practicing things. But you don't have to do this in a group. You can do group-based intensives, absolutely. I know a lot of people mostly work one-on-one in the intensive model. So for example, if you were to offer a DBT skills intensive, that could be 5 to 6 hours of, hour one, you're really orienting what is it that we're doing here, right? We're going to learn some foundational skills, some DBT skills for emotion regulation. And so this could be for people who have anxiety. This can be for someone who just got out of a long-term relationship, someone who has a falling out with a parent. There's lots of different reasons why people get emotionally dysregulated and don't know what to do with that. So hour one, orienting, what are we doing here? And even starting with like teaching some mindfulness skills. Hour two might be focused more on the distress tolerance skills. So you're teaching those crisis survivor tools. You're teaching them how do they understand how their emotions unfold over time, right? So what set off what, which set off what, which set off what, and how do we disrupt those patterns with some of these skills that we're talking about so far. Another hour might be focused entirely on emotional regulation. So really understanding what is the exact emotion that came up right now, because tired, angry, fine, upset, like those things may not always fully capture the picture of what's going on for someone. So really understanding what are the emotions and what works for you with some of these DBT skills that we're talking about to do something a little bit different. And then that's 3 hours. So you might take a break at that point. And then when you come back from a break, you can really start to dive into some of those interpersonal effectiveness skills. So if you know about DBT, you know the acronyms Dear Man, Give, Fast. So you can spend a lot of time talking about those and ultimately spend a whole other hour or 90 minutes practicing those skills, right? Giving this client their personalized plan of, okay, with where you're coming in with, what our focus was for today, thinking about all these skills you learned today, how are you going to use this moving forward? And as you're doing any role play of the skills, to basically ask those questions of what helped most, what worked, what was hard about this, how do we remind you to do this again in the future? So again, this is not EMDR. You can probably actually do DBT with a couple if you wanted to, but DBT this essentially falls under like psychoeducation based intensive again. And there are plenty of people who would want to do this because not a lot of people want to do this kind of work in a group of other people. A lot of people feel nervous to ask questions or to do the practice exercises, or again, in the DBT skills group, it's very focused on do your homework assignments and you're going to report on it the next day. But if they don't do that, then there might be shame coming up. So doing a one-on-one intensive could actually feel really supportive. Another example of an intensive you can do is focused on, I know a lot of us work with in a lot of different ways, perfectionism and people pleasing. And you can work on this, obviously, with EMDR, but that's not the only way to work with perfectionism and people pleasing. You can work, again, 1 hour is even just on psychoeducation. What is happening, right? What is this fawn response where you do just kind of self-abandon your needs, your wants in order to protect the relationship? And then what is happening inside, your responses to yourself, bringing in, if you're like IFS informed or trained, any inner critic parts. Like, do you not only have this fawn response, but then do you also beat yourself up? And what does that look like? And so you might do some more somatic exploration, some emotion focused exploration of what does shame look like for this client? What does fear look like for this client? You might do some journaling exercises with them around that. If you incorporate art therapy, not accelerated resolution, but actual like art therapy or sand tray, like you can do some of that in this intensive as well. And then again, spend a whole other hour or more doing more parts work, really exploring inner critic, people pleaser. What is this part that feels like it has to be perfect or else what? Like, what is the thing that's going to happen if we're not perfect? And then spending another hour, again, depends on how it looks when you've taken a break or not, but spending some time really trying to focus on how are we working to shift these patterns? So how are we going to rewrite our narrative that we have to be perfect and that we can't say no to other people? And how are we going to give ourselves some affirmations that feel really good to give ourselves? And how are we going to set boundaries? So we're starting with some psychoeducation, exploring some of the things that are happening, and ending with like, what are we doing differently? What's next? And then I've got two other ideas that I want to give you that are, again, not EMDR, not couples. Again, if you're here live, let me know if you have any questions. If you're watching the recording, let me know. But we know there are so many people who are going through burnout these days, whether that is healthcare professionals, whether that is a high exec CEO, someone in the C-suite, VPs, things like that, shift workers who work, shift 2, shift 3, the ones that are really hard. And so there are a lot of people who are just tired and they just want to work on a very quick reset. Like if you are burnt out, the idea of go to therapy for 2, 3, 4 months and you might start to see a shift, that's not the most exciting thing, right? Like a lot of people, if they're burnt out, they want to work on recovering ASAP. Some people go to a spa day and that doesn't always work, right? You might feel relaxed in the moment, but it didn't actually give you a reset that you needed. But essentially, offering a burnout recovery focused intensive is a way to get a little bit more immediately into like what's happening, how do we prevent this from happening again as much as possible, what are the exact skills that you need ASAP, so that you actually can feel like you don't hit this burnout wall again. And so an example of a 6-hour intensive that you might do, and again, don't do 6 hours in a row, take breaks. Hour one, obviously doing some intake and really doing like a burnout inventory of what's going on, what drives burnout, what makes it difficult to establish some balance, and really like what is the goal and what feels like realistic here. Because if it's not realistic for people to change their work schedules, to quit jobs, to stop commuting to work, like whatever it is, if that's not realistic, obviously you're not spending the intensive talking about those kind of action items. So really taking inventory of what is going on. And then you might spend the next hour doing some nervous system reset work. So whether that is mindfulness or somatic practices, if you do brain spotting work or tapping that is or is not related to EMDR, because there's emotional, I think it's freedom technique or tapping. I always forget what the T stands for. There's lots of different somatic work that you can do, as well as breath work you can do. If you incorporate sound baths into your practice, that would be something to also do. If you do trauma-informed yoga, that would be something to incorporate. So really spending that second hour just creating space and helping the person to actually reset and relax. Hour 3, you might, for example, really clarify, what is this person's values? What are their needs? What are their wants? That's a little bit different from like an inventory of what's making you burn out, but is the burnout a part of perfectionism? Like we're working so hard because we want to be liked, because we want to be successful, because the fear of being seen as a failure is so huge that we are, go, go, go and pushing ourselves. So really clarifying what is our value, and then also doing kind of an audit of where are you spending your time? Where are you spending your energy? And is that in alignment with what your values are and what your needs are? Because obviously, we have to work, we have to pay bills, we have to support families, all of that stuff. So some of that may not be in perfect alignment, but if there are other things where it's like, wow, I never really realized I was doing all of this and I'm spending too much time there, right? And I really don't want to be. I just noticed I was doing that out of pattern and out of habit. And so again, that's 3 hours already. You might take a break after that. Hour 4, if you're doing more, you might be really starting to talk about some boundaries. So how do we need to set boundaries with ourselves? How do we need to set boundaries with others? You might spend time here again doing interpersonal process work of role playing some difficult conversations of what happens if they get pushback on their boundaries? What happens? What's like the fine line between someone asking something of them that stretches them a little bit and they're okay with? How do they check in with themselves that they're okay with that versus someone asks something of them and they really want to set that boundary and say, absolutely not. And then you might spend hour 5, hour 6, depending on how you structure it, really focusing on what are some rest rituals that you can do. How do we bring fun back into your life? Because a lot of people who are burnt out, they're not actually having fun. They might be taking time off. They might be going on vacations, but they might be still fully immersed in work and thinking about work, even if they're not like checking their phone and having to hop on Zoom meetings or answer emails or things like that. But how do we actually rest? How do we actually have fun? Because I think that's really important to talk about, not just, the boundary setting is important, but the actions that come from that too of, okay, you've set the boundary and now what now? What are you going to do that you said, no, I'm not going to check my emails while I'm on vacation? And really figuring out their personalized, how are we going to help you continue to reset from burnout and recover from it, as well as prevent it in the future. Because I think a lot of people, again, who are very high performing, very overachieving, perfectionistic, type A type people, it could be easy to fall right back into that pattern, right? And then they know the skills, but they had a hard time implementing the skills, or they still needed something to overcome that. So you don't have to do EMDR with burnout. Lots of different other things that you can do to establish some effective ways and practices to help the person recover in the future. And then one last idea, again, this is not an all-inclusive list, but grief and loss, right? There are a lot of people who, sorry, I'm getting some errors popping up on my computer. Grief and loss is, as we know, it's an ongoing process, right? This is not a matter of help them get over their grief as quickly as possible. This is more a matter of so many people who are going through grief feel like no one wants to create the time and space for them, right? A lot of people are like, they might mean well in it, but they are trying to encourage them, like, to get over it in subtle ways, and sometimes not so subtle ways, depending on how long it's been since they've lost someone or something. And so to really actually give time and space for that grief expression can be so beneficial for people. And so this could be, depending on where someone is in their grief journey, sometimes people just really need to understand, like, I don't even understand what's happening. So again, there might be a psychoeducation component to it. There might also be, really just flushing out and giving that time to, let's talk about it, right? Let's talk about like what exactly happened, what led up to it, what are you doing right now to grieve? And that might be establishing, if this person is like, I feel guilty because I haven't thought about the person or the pet or whatever it is that I've lost, and I feel guilty because of that. So how do we actually establish some rituals of remembrance? There are lots of people who light a candle once a month. There are people who set up more of like an altar, or like have photos somewhere on their walls. Like, what are the things that are going to be helpful for you to still feel connection with this thing, this person that you lost? You can spend even more time, hour 2, 3, for example, really just expressing the emotions that come from that. Some people like to write letters to the people or the thing that they have lost. And so that could be done with you, that could be shared with you. Again, there can be lots of somatic practices, art-based practices that you're doing there. And then really kind of wrapping up with like, how do we make meaning from this? And not like everything happens for a reason kind of way, but how do we really understand what it is we lost, what that means for you, and how you want to move forward, how you want to maintain connection in whatever ways are authentic for you to maintain connection. And then how do we just integrate all of that moving forward? It's not about stop feeling sad, stop feeling the grief. It's just about how do you actually incorporate grief in a way that it doesn't feel overwhelming, in a way that it doesn't make you shut down every time. Like, I've experienced grief in my life, and I know for the most part, I can be pretty okay day to day, but until I really worked on and processed my grief, there would be times where I shut down and I couldn't handle anything. And now I might have memories pop up and I tear up because, I lost things that I have loved, pets specifically. But for me, it doesn't like take over life anymore because I've established what are my rituals for remembrance. I've written letters. There's really cute, like pet grieving journals for those who do not know. Um, but really thinking about, again, like with grief and loss, there's just a lot of people who don't get time and space for it. So, how do you give time and space for this? Lots of other examples of different things that you can do with intensives, whether that's working on codependency, self-compassion and self-worth, even exploring like identity. There are so many ways and places people don't get to explore that, especially if they have mixed cultural, social identities. So that could be another way to talk, to spend time in an intensive. There is not like intensives, I think a lot of people have gotten it too much overlap when we think of like a Venn diagram, that like it has to be a processing based intensives. You had to have worked through something. You had to have like focused on a trauma or focused on conflict in a relationship or whatever it is. But as you hear me talking about today, intensives can be a lot of psychoeducational work. It can be a lot of just like making space. It can be practicing things. It can be journaling, meditating, lots of different practices, but they do not have to be just EMDR and just couples intensives. Again, I think those people are loudest about how successful they are with intensives, but so many other things that you can do. Even when I've done an EMDR intensive, like that's what got booked. There's been times where I've done like 30 minutes of EMDR, but mostly the person wanted to talk through how they're upset with their family. They didn't want to process that with EMDR. They just wanted to process it and talk through it. And so it's okay if also what people think they need based on your marketing isn't actually what they need. And that's why I always come back to the marketing component of you don't have to market a fancy modality, right? You don't have to say, I do EMDR, I do IFS, I do this. And what you're really marketing is that transformation that you're going to get them. So here's what you're going to learn. Here's what you're going to practice. Here's how that's going to look different moving forward. Here's the kind of life that's going to make for you moving forward. And that's really what you're talking about, right? You can say, and we're going to do that with DBT. We're going to do that with EMDR. We're going to do that with whatever. But people aren't necessarily coming for the modality. Even if they are seeking a modality specific thing, they're doing it because they've heard that is the thing that's going to get them the transformation they need. So the more you focus on that, the more successful you will be. And I hope this was helpful to just hear that there are lots of different examples of intensives you can do that do not mean you have to go get trained in something you're not trained in, unless you're passionate and excited about it. That's very different. I just know I've seen a lot of Facebook posts these days of people asking like, what's the most profitable niche? What's the most profitable like training? What's going to get me the most amount of money? And like, you can do that. You can go ahead and get EMDR trained. It's a lot of money. If you like it, fantastic, but don't do it just because it seems like other people are successful at doing it. Don't do it just because you think that's the only way to be successful with intensives. Do things you're excited about. And then otherwise, when it comes to intensives, do what you're already doing. Just flush it out into something that's a little bit longer and really center what is the transformation that these people are going to get if they do this intensive, right? What are they going to walk away with? What are they going to learn? How are they going to benefit from sitting down for 3 hours, 6 hours, 10 hours, however long it is with you? So thank you so much for being here today, for watching this recording. As always, if you have questions, let me know in the Facebook group. And then otherwise, I hope you all have fun with this. Like at the end of the day, that's what this is about, is being creative in how we get to support our clients. And that's what I'm most excited about, is how creative I get to get when a client comes to seek help from me. I'm not sticking to a modality. I'm sticking to what's going to help this person most. So I wish you all the best of luck with things. And I'm probably going to be going live sometime next month as well to talk more about the marketing aspects. Because I know that's another big question that a lot of people have. So stay tuned for that. And thank you so much. Good to see you all. Bye-bye.